It was a cold, moonless night when Emma decided to take the shortcut through the woods. She had done it 100 times before, but this time felt different. The air was heavier, the silence more oppressive. The crunch of leaves beneath her boots echoed unnaturally loud, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. She pulled her jacket tighter, trying to shake the unease creeping up her spine. Emma had grown up in the small town of Black Hollow, where everyone knew everyone, and the woods were just a part of life. Kids played in them, couples strolled through them, and hunters tracked game in them. But there were stories too. Old tales whispered around campfires about shadows that moved on their own, about voices that called your name when no one was there. Emma had always laughed them off, until tonight. The first sign that something was wrong was the sound. A faint whisper, so soft she almost thought she imagined it. She stopped, her breath visible in the cold air, and listened. Nothing, just the rustle of leaves in the wind. She shook her head and kept walking, chiding herself for being so jumpy. But then it came again, louder this time. A voice, but not quite a voice, more like the echo of one, distorted and distant. It was calling her name, Emma. Her heart skipped a beat. She spun around, her flashlight cutting through the darkness. The beam illuminated the trees, their gnarled branches like skeletal fingers reaching out for her. But there was no one there. "Hello?" she called, her voice trembling. "Is someone there?" The only answer was the wind, carrying with it that same whisper. It was closer now, almost in her ear. She turned again, her flashlight swinging wildly, but the beam caught nothing but empty air. She started walking faster, her boots crunching through the frost-covered leaves. The whisper followed, growing louder, more insistent. It wasn't just her name now. It was words she couldn't quite make out, a language that didn't sound human. Her breath came in short, panicked gasps as she broke into a run. The trees seemed to close in around her, their branches clawing at her jacket, her hair. The flashlight flickered, the beam growing dimmer with each step. She shook it, willing it to stay on, but the light sputtered and died, plunging her into darkness. She stopped, her chest heaving, and fumbled for her phone. The screen lit up, casting a pale glow, but the battery was low. She opened the flashlight app, but the light was weak, barely piercing the blackness. The whisper was all around her now, a chorus of voices speaking in tongues she couldn't understand. And then she saw them. Shadows, dozens of them, moving between the trees. They were humanoid but wrong. Too tall, too thin, their limbs too long. They had no faces, just hollow voids where eyes and mouths should be. They moved silently, gliding over the ground without disturbing the leaves. Emma froze, her phone slipping from her hand and landing in the dirt. The screen went dark, and the shadows closed in. She could feel them now, their presence like a physical weight pressing down on her. The whispers grew louder, more urgent, filling her head until she thought it would burst. She stumbled backward, her foot catching on a root, and she fell. The shadows loomed over her, their forms shifting and twisting in ways that made her stomach churn. She squeezed her eyes shut, praying it was a nightmare, that she would wake up in her bed, safe and sound. But when she opened her eyes, they were still there. One of the shadows reached out, its elongated fingers brushing against her cheek. The touch was icy, sending a shock of cold through her body. She tried to scream, but no sound came out. The shadows leaned in closer, their whispers becoming a deafening roar. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, it stopped. The shadows were gone, the forest was silent. Emma lay there, trembling, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She didn't know how long she stayed there, too afraid to move. But eventually, she forced herself to stand. Her legs felt like jelly, but she managed to stumble back to the path and out of the woods. When she finally reached her house, she collapsed on the porch, her body shaking uncontrollably. She wanted to believe it had been a hallucination, a trick of the mind brought on by exhaustion and stress. But the next morning, when she looked in the mirror, she saw it. A mark, a faint, hand-shaped bruise on her cheek, right where the shadow had touched her. Emma never went into the woods again. She moved away from Black Hollow a few months later, hoping to leave the memories behind. But sometimes, late at night, she still hears the whispers, and she knows, deep down, that the shadows are still out there. Emma tried to forget, She moved to the city, where the noise of traffic and the glow of streetlights drowned out the silence of the woods. She told herself it was over. The shadows, the whispers, the mark on her cheek. It was all in the past. But the past has a way of clawing its way back. It started with the dreams. Every night, she found herself back in the woods, the shadows closing in around her. She would wake up, drenched in sweat, her heart pounding, the echo of whispers still ringing in her ears. She told herself it was just her mind processing the trauma. But the dreams grew more vivid, more real. And then, one night, she woke up not in her bed, but standing in the middle of her living room, her feet caked in dirt and leaves. She stared at her reflection in the dark window, her face pale and gaunt, the bruise on her cheek darker than ever. She didn't remember getting out of bed. She didn't remember walking. But there she was, as if something had pulled her from sleep and guided her there. The next morning, she called her mother. She hadn't spoken to her in months, not since she left Black Hollow. Her mother's voice was strained, hesitant, as if she knew why Emma was calling. "Mom," Emma said, her voice trembling, "what really happened in those woods? The stories you used to tell me, were they just stories?" There was a long pause on the other end of the line. When her mother finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "Emma, you need to come home." Emma stood at the edge of the woods, the trees looming like sentinels. She hadn't wanted to come back, but she didn't know where else to turn. Her mother had refused to say more over the phone, insisting they talk in person. Now standing in the shadow of the forest, Emma felt the same oppressive weight she had that night months ago. Her mother was waiting for her at the house, her face drawn and tired. She looked older, as if the weight of some unspoken secret had aged her. She ushered Emma inside and sat her down at the kitchen table, her hands shaking as she poured 2 cups of tea. "The woods," her mother began, her voice barely audible, "have always been different. People in town have known it for generations. There's something there, something old and hungry. It doesn't show itself often, but when it does, it leaves a mark." Emma touched the bruise on her cheek, her stomach churning. "What is it?" Her mother hesitated, her eyes darting to the window as if she feared the shadows might be listening. "We call them the whispering shadows. They're not ghosts, not exactly. They're something older, something that was here long before us. They feed on fear, on pain, and once they've marked you, they don't let go." Emma's heart sank. "What do you mean, they don't let go?" Her mother reached across the table, gripping Emma's hand tightly. "They'll keep coming for you, Emma, in your dreams, in your waking moments. They'll pull you back to the woods, no matter how far you run. And if they catch you," she trailed off, her eyes filling with tears. "If they catch me, what?" Emma demanded, her voice rising. Her mother didn't answer. She didn't need to. The look in her eyes said enough. That night, Emma lay in her childhood bed, staring at the ceiling. The house was quiet, but the silence felt heavy, suffocating. She could feel the woods outside, their presence pressing against the walls of the house. She tried to tell herself she was safe, that the shadows couldn't reach her here, but deep down, she knew better. She must have fallen asleep at some point, because the next thing she knew, she was standing in the woods again. The trees were taller, their branches thicker, the air colder. The shadows were there too, circling her like predators. She tried to run, but her feet were rooted to the ground. The whispers filled her ears, louder and more urgent than ever. "Emma," they called, their voices overlapping, twisting together into a single haunting sound. "You can't escape us." She woke up screaming, her body drenched in sweat. Her mother burst into the room, her face pale with fear. "Emma, what's wrong?" Emma couldn't speak. She just pointed to the window. Outside, the shadows were moving, their forms shifting and writhing against the glass. They didn't need the woods anymore. They had followed her home. Emma and her mother spent the next few days researching, desperate for a way to break the shadows' hold. They scoured old books, talked to townsfolk, even visited the local historian, an elderly man named Mr. Grayson who had lived in Black Hollow his entire life. "The whispering shadows," Mr. Grayson said, his voice gravelly with age, "are tied to the land. They've been here since before the town was founded. Some say they're the spirits of those who died in the woods. Others say they're something far older. But one thing's for sure, once they've marked you, they won't stop until they have you." There has to be a way to stop them, Emma pleaded. Mr. Grayson hesitated, his eyes narrowing as if weighing his words. There's a ritual, he said slowly. An old one, passed down through generations. But it's dangerous. If it doesn't work, it could make things worse. Emma didn't care about the risk. She would do anything to be free of the shadows. The ritual required them to go back into the woods, to the exact spot where Emma had first encountered the shadows. They went at midnight, the moon casting an eerie glow over the trees. Emma carried a lantern, its flickering light barely piercing the darkness. Her mother walked beside her, clutching a bundle of herbs and a small, ancient-looking knife. When they reached the clearing, Emma's heart was pounding. The shadows were already there, waiting. They circled the edges of the clearing, their forms shifting and twisting, their whispers filling the air.